Tom Campbell here. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you and enjoy the video.
All right, Rooney was first in line. Please go ahead.
So I'll read my question. In the 2015 September Fireside Chat Part 2, you talked about visiting another reality and spending 2 to 3 months there. While it was only some hours here in this reality, I've been trying to fit that into a model of reality that makes logical sense, but there are some potential issues that I want to explore. Paraphrasing what you said, seemed in the local time to be 2-3 months. It wasn't months here, it was probably more like hours here instead of months there. The clocks are just different. Time in one place doesn't relate to time in the other. 2 different clocks, 2 different ways of dealing with it. But it's just getting a data stream, not going to a place. Okay, so let's think about the possible logical ramifications. Assuming that this time ratio difference between this reality and the one you visited is due to the 2 clocks themselves, that would mean that the clock in the other reality would be about 300 times as fast. That's 6 hours compared to 2.5 months. That would mean that a different individual in that reality with the capability like Tom would not have the opportunity to use 1 day in his own reality while exploring the other, so this one, for 2 or 3 months. It feels strange that there can be this kind of preferential time ratio in terms of visiting other realities, which would be a hindrance for the other. For example, if a different Tom native to that other reality would only experience about 1 minute of our local time during 1 night of sleep in that reality, that precludes them from learning about this reality in the same way that you could visit theirs. It would also logically mean that there are other possible realities that would really be impossible to experience in that preferential way of time efficiency. And that when the LCS presented that lesson to Tom, it could only pick from a subset of the possible realities. There are several other implications. Does such a large time ratio difference mean that IOCs getting a data stream from a reality with a much faster clock evolve or de-evolve that much faster compared to realities with a slower clock? Would they experience 300 incarnations, assuming all else is equal, while someone here would experience 1? If Tom's experience was not due to the time ratio of the 2 clocks, but rather an exception granted by the LCS, then the LCS would have to adjust its rate of time just for Tom, and that seems like a non-trivial effort, as changing the time ratio 1 or 2 realities could have other consequences. If it was an exception, that would mean that only 1 IOC could travel from 1 reality to the other while that unique data stream was running. As for example, someone else from their reality visiting this reality at the same time would lead to logical impossibility in terms of time. And also, what is these 2 or 3 months in local time? Is that time in the local day-night cycle, if it was a PMR type reality? Or is it 2 or 3 months of comparable Earth time? And the last thing is that one scientific test to explore the possibilities would be to revisit that reality you visited for 2 or 3 months, note the time ratio while there, then compare to the implied time ratio when not there by revisiting again at a later time. For example, it would be obvious if the time ratio changed significantly between the revisits. This experiment would say something fundamental about the reality of time, such as whether it was a custom experience or more general experience, and would narrow the logical possibilities. That was my question.
Okay. It was, I would say that it was not due to the fact that it seemed like several months in one place and only took hours in the other, was not primarily due to difference in time. All the realities do have their own clock, obviously. That's the nature of a virtual reality, but there isn't, but that would not be main difference. I suspect a lot of those clocks are also dependent on the environment as ours is. You know, we define our time, our second is defined based on astronomy. So that they would be, you know, maybe their own astronomy would be the key element there. But I don't think that was the main thing. You know, the way I said that is that there were a few hours here and it seemed as though there were several months in the other set. And then I mentioned the time differences, which was probably an error on my part, because though there are different time distances, that's not really what was going on, which is why you found the logical problem with it, because that's not the main thing. A similar thing happens in dreams sometimes. Sometimes you'll have dream and they'll run through many days. In your dream, you know, you'll have a dream sequence and it will start, this will happen and that will happen, then it's the next day and other things happen, and then it's the next day and other things happen. And you might get several days in a, how long is REM sleep? You know, maybe 20 minutes or something like that. You maybe a half an hour, but you can get multiple days in. The time, the sense of time passing basically can be given to you in the data stream as events happen. Then, you know, fast forward isn't necessarily the right word, but then move forward. Now you're seeing some of the results of the decisions you made. So it's later, and then you see more. Also, when I've been to things for long periods of time, often it's because I've made many trips. I know the one reality, I'm not sure which one I was talking about then, but there was one reality I was in. I went back multiple times. It's, I don't know, a dozen times or more. And when I got back, I seemed to pick up the storyline more or less where it was when I left, you know, plus or minus, I don't know, so a day or so, or maybe even hours, but it would seem like I hadn't been gone long. But for me, it was maybe a day or two later of my time. And I'd go back into that time and I keep going back into that time. So the actual time that I spent there, the number of things that I did, consequences seen, you know, actions and reactions, that's kind of how I was telling time. Comparing it kind of Earth time. You know, if you do something today that creates a reaction, it may be 2 or 3 days a week before you actually get that reaction. You know, you make some statement or you make a decision or choice to do something or not do something. It's often weeks before you really get consequences of that decision. And I went through many things done and said and consequences, and more things done and said and consequences. And it turned out in my mind to be a couple of months worth of time going on. But I don't know that, you know, don't take that couple of months too seriously or too literally. That's more just what it seemed like. So it was an extensive thing. It wasn't just a short, brief visit and you do what you do and you disappear and that is it, it's over. It was something that was quite extended in time. It appeared to be several months worth of my time, but that's more metaphorical than it is actual. That's probably a better description of it. So yes, time frames are different. I suspect all the time frames, you know, it depends on the speed at which things go, you know, and how the virtual reality is run. You could take a virtual reality like World of Warcraft and you could run the clock speed up such that it was running like fast forward and all the little characters would be flying around and the motion would look jerky. But inside of that reality, those characters would be having a normal day. They wouldn't see themselves as flying around with jerky motions. They would be seeing themselves as doing the things that they did in the day. It's just now if they were doing double time, their day would only take half as long because they were on fast forward. But from inside the virtual reality, you wouldn't really notice what the time scale was. To you, it would still seem your normal day, taking up the normal amount of time, and you just accomplished a whole lot more in that day than we do an hour. So time scales can be different. And I'm sure that the clocks are not all set to exactly the same as our clock. Each virtual reality can have its own clock. I don't know that the refresh rate in Sims is the same as the refresh rate in, World of Warcraft. They probably have different refresh rates. Refresh rates generally are driven by motion, by things that happen quickly. If there's more motion, then they need a higher refresh rate to follow it smoothly. If there's less motion, and the Sims doesn't have a lot of fast motion in it, then the refresh rate would be a lot less. So it kind of depends on the situation and probably the physical setting as far as what any particular clock is set to. But the passage of time is in the mind of the beholder. So if you're in a movie running on double time, or in a fast forward movie running double time, you're not necessarily aware that there's any difference in time, because everything is moving in double time. So if you got out measurement devices, there'd be ways to tell, but just your perception of the time going by can be easily modified. So I think you read too much into that, and I probably didn't say it very well. Basically, the experience I had there was an experience that seemed to be over months. An experience over days would be you said something, but you didn't really get any consequences back yet, because that takes time for what you say to get to somebody else. They have to react. Their reaction is to get back to you, and you react to them, and it gets back to them, and they react, and it gets back to you. All of that interaction takes time.
Do you remember if it was a PMR-like reality, or it was a not PMR?
I don't remember what reality that was. That could apply to several realities, and I did them different ways. One of them was a PMR reality, the one that I kept going back to. So it was extended over a long period of time. That would have also been the case for let me move my mic over. I forgot.
I was trying to find the moment to tell you that, Tom. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that would work better.
Oh,
so
thank you.
That also was similar to the times that as I say, I was working in the transition reality. That was a whole series of nights that lasted probably for a month or so in Earth time, but it was only night times. Every night, as soon as I closed my eyes, bang, there I was, and I had things to do, and it's like I left off wherever I started. It was that kind of a thing. So, and for about a month, I couldn't lie down in bed and close my eyes without immediately going to that particular reality frame. So over that, I could say really lasted over months for me, but it was a whole bunch of probably, 1 hour or 2 hour snippets all sewn together to make it look like it was one thing. So in that way, those two were similar. I was one not that long ago. Actually, there was a trip that I took Donna along, and that only lasted probably an hour or so in real time here on Earth, but it actually covered like 2 or 3 days in that other reality. Night came, night went. Well, 2 days. The day we arrived, and then it went over a night, and the next day. So
that could be to their own day-night cycle, right? Maybe it was. So do you think that is due to the clocks, or just they have another kind of solar system, another kind of period around their sun?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just the appearance. Because the action that took place there was all continuous. It wasn't the place where I left and come back and left and come back. And that one, we just got there, and it was continuous time. and it played out over 2 days. Because we did, we were there in the middle of the day, and then it came night, and then we had night, then we had some the next day, and then the next night exited. So it was that sort of a thing, but the actual experience here was, probably an hour, maybe less. So time is just different, but it's your perception of time. I don't know that we can trace that back to an actual accounting of the seconds as compared to some other reality frame. I think it's just a perception. When you don't have, if you don't have any background to give you a sense of the passage of time, you lose track of time very easily. If somebody puts you in a room, no windows, just a room, and you're locked in the room and there's nothing in there, there's nothing going on in there at all, pretty soon you don't know whether you've been in that room for an hour or 3 hours or a day. You lose track of where you are in time because there's nothing changing by which you can judge the flow of time. So your perception of time then gets really strange. And sometimes people will think they've been there for very long times when it's been short, or short times when it's been long, just because you don't have a reference. So once you leave this reality and get into another, the references are all different.
So, what do you think that will be a general experience? Let's say you visit that reality again. Would 1 hour here then seem like maybe 2 days there? Do you think that could happen again, or was it unique to that visit?
No, I think that probably could happen again. Now, another way of looking at it also is that I'd say that out-of-body experiences tend to be single-player games. I think that's probably a good metaphor for them. They're single-player games.
Yeah. Now,
in that case, I took Donna along with me, so both of us was in that same thing. But it was a game, a 2-player game, as opposed to a single-player game. But in that case, you can play you can play World of Warcraft and go through many days and nights through their cycle, all in a few hours. The sun comes up and the sun goes down, and you can go through whole daytimes very quickly there. So in a virtual reality, the way day and night comes by just depends on how the server's serving it up. I don't think there's any way to directly compare timeframes, because time is a perception. Now, if you had some equipment maybe that you could measure things, but that I don't see as something that's actually likely to happen.
But would most PM outside realities have some kind of calendar system, some way to have a count of time?
Yes, they do. They have their own.
Compare that,
yeah, they have their own sense of time, but it's local to them. How long are their days? How long are their months or weeks, or do they even have months or weeks?
But that would be one way to compare or have a reference.
Yeah, that's possible. When I go other places, I don't necessarily go look at calendars or look at clocks on the wall. All of that's kind of irrelevant mostly, but I guess it's possible.
Well, it's irrelevant unless maybe you can learn something about the large reality, or reality itself. Okay. Yeah, thanks for that.
You're welcome.
Opportunity to ask.
I notice everybody here, I know, except for one young lady right in the middle of my screen who is Nishapaka. I just want to say welcome.
You know her, Tom.
Do I?
Nambata, she's been to a couple of immersives.
Oh.
Yeah.
I didn't put those two names together.
Bata was in France.
Yes, in France.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Christian has a question next. Go ahead, Christian.
Hi, Tom. I have a question about binaural beats. We have been using them extensively at the immersives, quite successfully. And I did some research on the PubMed, medical publication database, how effective binaural beats are in terms of treatment of fear. And there have been a couple of studies. It was not quite clear. Some studies said, no, it's not so effective. For some, it was. But they have not been easy to be compared because they have so different variables and the study design was very different. So I was thinking about doing my own study as I'm currently studying psychotherapy science at the Sigmund Freud University in Vienna. And I've already exposé together for my bachelor thesis to carry out a study in the university outpatient clinic. So I could work with real patients who are in therapy for treating generalized fear. So not specific fears like for spiders or flying in an aeroplane, but very generalized fears. So what I want to do is to carry out a study to have a tool for the patients to proceed with their fear work at home by the support of binaural beats. And it would be a placebo-controlled study. So some would get relaxing music and some will get relaxing music with enhanced binaural beats. So it's not so easy to distinguish those who listen only to the music. It will be still not harmful. It will be still relaxing. It will be still good for them. So ethically, it would be, I think, acceptable. So it's just some ideas about the study design, but I think it could be carried out. When I get that study granted, I would like to get your ideas about some things like the parameters. There are so many variables. How long should the session be? Which frequency would be ideal, etc., etc. So there are many factors which can influence and the results. I don't know what the outcome will be. That's why we're doing these studies, and there's not a lot of information out on the publication database. So there's something we can learn about and maybe give the patients some tools at hand where they can proceed with the work on their own pace at home. It will not replace any treatment in the patient clinic. So they would usually get one treatment per week there. But we also can monitor the progress because that will be over a couple of months, usually such a treatment. And so you could see potentially some effect compared to the placebo-controlled group.
Mm-hmm.
And what I want to know is, what do you think about that idea? Is that something which could work, or I should just look for something else? And second question would be, if I get that granted, can I get in touch with you to work out all the parameters, the variables to get it right, or to get it on the first shot with an ideal setup in terms of which frequency, how often, and so on?
Yeah, sure. You can send me an email, and if that doesn't seem to work, send it to Keith, and he'll see to it that I get it. But there's several ways you could approach it, and all of them would be interesting. I think, yes, it does have a fair chance of working, of having a difference between the groups. There may be some variables into the severity of their fear or the kind of fear they have, where it might work better for some than others. So that would be a variable that you probably don't have. So probably not one you can adjust. They probably will all be out of a similar background. So it could work better though for some patients and not as well for others. It kind of depends on the patient. Another variable that you could use is whether or not there's any guided imagery in it. If it's just plain music with binaural beats in the background, you know, how dominant the binaural beats are one thing, you know, whether they're very, very subtle buried in the music to where you could hardly tell, to the point that they're right there, clear and out in front, you know. So though they do work when they're subtle, they work better when they're not. When you can hear them a little more clearly, or even when they're fairly loud, they work a little better. But anyway, the guided thing is whether you just play the music and just play the binaural beats, or whether the people with whether both groups then could be led to a space or a place where they feel relaxed, where they feel confident. You know, you could build, you know, do some confidence building, relaxing, even give them a space to go to, you know, a mental space where they could bring up that image and it would cause them to relax. So you could do those kinds of things with them and do it in both groups and see if the one with the binaural beats, you know, got more out of it than the ones that didn't. And that way both groups would probably get something that would be valuable to them. And then it would just be a measure of whether the one with binaural beats was more valuable, which is a nice idea, that everybody gets something that's valuable, but some kind of voice that leads them to some tools that they could use for calmness and for confidence and for I'm okay, you know, everything's going to be all right, you know, that sort of thing. That would be helpful along with the binaural beats. What the binaural beats will do will give them more of their EEG down in the theta region. So it'll put them in a little more receptive state than if they don't have them. So you could do it just with music and just with binaural beats. And the binaural beats may have music or may not, or the binaural beats may be obvious within the music.
There will be obvious. So
yeah, there's lots of variables. Lots of ways you can slice and dice this thing to make it different. And maybe you have to run a couple of pilot studies just with 3 or 4 people in them, just to get some idea of what works best like that, and then do it with your larger group where you do it both ways. Yeah, I'd maybe work on the binaural beats first. Just work on that with some individuals until you think you've got that fairly optimized for them, and then repeat the exact same process except without the beats on the control group. Because otherwise it takes a little trial and error to get an optimization.
True. That's the difficult part. So the studies which are out on the publication database, they are very diverse and complete different study designs. So it's not so easy to get something out there, and they were especially not designed for be an additional tool for an ongoing therapeutic process. So that would be kind of something new. So we can learn something about it, and
I think there's a lot of promise there. I believe that it probably will help those people to be in that theta state while they get, whether they get suggestions or whether just in their own mind they're trying to relax. Probably with suggestions given to them is probably better. It'll probably have a bigger effect than if it's just in the background, but they don't really have any guidance on what to do with it.
That's true.
That won't be as large an effect. But it's whether the guidance with the binaural beat is more strongly received than the guidance without it would be the key. So I think the guidance was probably a good idea in either case.
Yeah, that's very valuable input. Thank you, Tom. That's good idea. I will include that into my study design.
Yeah.
But it's still 1 year to go to complete the study, so I'm just at the beginning. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jessica, if you would like to go next, thank you. And congratulations on your studies, Christian. That's wonderful.
Hi, Tom. Hi, everyone. Tom, I have a question to ask, and this is just a hypothetical question. That as we're using much more, I suppose, synthetic AI with humans, so that in a quite a useful way sometimes, so that people who maybe had a back injury are able to walk again, etc. So enhanced movements and making life easier for people to become more able-bodied after accidents or whatever. But if it gets to the point where we become such hybrids that we have a limited area of choice, would that be of less value to individuated unit of consciousness to come into this reality? And would it be of less value to the larger consciousness system? And particularly if we became so hybrid that we became less human and more artificial intelligence, but together we were half and half. Would this be viable, and would this still be a viable reality?
Well, two things here. One, if we avatars had choices that were more mundane and less interesting, had particularly less moral components to them, then yes, we would be less interesting as an avatar, for consciousness to evolve in. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure that having more and more AI applied will actually take us to a smaller decision space, because we're talking about decision space here. If the decision space is much smaller, then we're not as attractive. I mean, we have small decision space consciousness here already. That's dogs and cats and horses and, things like that. Yeah. But if we decrease our decision space, then we'd be less attractive for individual units of consciousness to use as avatars. Well, on the other hand, I don't see that there's a one-to-one connection to using more AI and having less decision space. Mostly AI is used to increase decision space. We use AI to take care of small, simple things to allow us more freedoms to do bigger and more complex things. So if you use AI to help somebody walk who wasn't walking before, well, the ability to walk really increases their decision space a whole lot. So most of the AI, we talk about AI in our computers. Our computers try to help us do things like spell checkers. Okay, spell checkers can be an AI, and they can look at the way we spell things and the way we misspell things, and they can custom fit themselves to us and the way we write and that sort of thing. That makes them an AI. But I think that offers us more decision space, not less. So now we can write and be creative without worrying so much about getting the spelling right, or at least we get suggestions and flag those things that we, typos and other kinds of things that otherwise would take our time to go do. AI does that for us, and now we can put that time someplace else. So mostly that's the whole point of AI, is to make our life richer and to enable us to do more stuff. So I don't know that the advance of kind of what it's called cybernetics, which is the machine-human interface, if that becomes more and more pervasive with computers, I can see in some instances where it might, if computers did everything for us, then maybe we would just, not do much. But I don't really see that. I see computers as enabling us to do more. which is kind of going the other way, increasing our decision space.
I understand what you're saying, but there's always the other side of human nature, where there are vested interests that would manipulate things and do manipulate things to influence choices or to restrict choices of others. So I was speaking more hypothetically, in that it could be used to greatly limit the choices of the individual.
Yeah, if the individual would put up with that, I would hope that the individuals wouldn't put up with if being limited, that they would become aware that they were limited, and they would resist being limited, and they would create new ways of, not being limited. For instance, the Chinese public is limited into what URLs they can put in. They all have to be approved URLs, otherwise they're blocked. But then, talking to people who live in China recently and have visited China, most everybody has an antenna in their attic, and they get their own downloads, and they circumvent the system. And the system sort of allows it because there's so many people doing that. It's, the internet's something that's hard to control, because that energy is beamed down from satellites, and it's really hard to block that. So I give a vote for human ingenuity, getting around those kinds of barricades and those kinds of problems. It may take us a while to figure out how to get around it, but we humans are pretty clever about escaping the constraints that we have to deal with.
So I suppose the very tools that they use to constrain are the very tools that enable us to be more creative.
For the most part, they help nudge us to greater creativity, as we need it. So I don't think that we're going to just lie down and become blobs that easily. Oh, there may be some that do that, but I don't think that's going to be a major thing going on. People are more robust than that.
Well, that's quite encouraging, Tom. I appreciate that. Could I ask a question on the back of that, please, if that's okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
When you did an interview with Bruce Lipton some time ago, the two scientists, and he mentioned that in a fully functioning organism, there's no wealth. Every part of the organism has what it requires, and any wealth is just then energy that's shared within the organism. So I'm guessing from a biological point of view, that means the body or the physical organism is completely healthy, and then you get bundles of energy with whatever wealth is left over after every part of the system is functioning. So I wanted to ask, from an MBT point of view, I'm assuming that when you address that in a corporation, the wealth would be distributed amongst the entities that are creating the wealth, and perhaps according to the responsibilities and the inputs within the individuals within that organization, but the wealth would be distributed amongst that organization.
Yes.
That
Yes.
on a MBT point of view globally as well, because if we have, as we probably have, the few that are taking the wealth at great expense of the many, how would that need to change in order for there to be no wealth in this physical reality that we're in?
Okay, the way you're saying that, basically there would be no hoarding. What he said about about biology is that there was no hoarding of resources. That as the energy becomes available to the body, the organs take what they need. The brain takes what it needs. The skin takes what it needs. The eyes take what it needs. Everything takes what it needs, and no more. It just takes what it needs to do its job, and doesn't hoard any for later. So what he was saying, that in our biological system, which is a hugely complex system.
Yeah.
The system has evolved to be cooperative. It's not that one organ tries to hoard all the resources so it can have it on a rainy day. It has evolved to be cooperative and share the resources that are available. Now, there's some organs that are more important than others. Some are on the front end of that distribution, and some are on the tail end of that distribution. The skin is an organ that's on the tail end of that distribution. So if you don't have a good diet and you don't create enough energy for the body, it's the skin that's going to show you that first. It's going to have problems because it's on the tail end of that. It gets what's left. Now, hopefully what's left will be plenty for it to be healthy. But if you eat very poorly or your nutrition isn't good, then the first organ to show that distress is going to be the skin, because they say it's on the tail end of the distribution. So it doesn't mean that everybody always gets as much as they need, but it means that nobody's hoarding. And yes, we humans, as we evolve as social beings on this planet, we will have to do something similar, because that's the low entropy solution. That's the cooperation. That's the caring. That's that it's about other, not about me. The hoarding it's all about me. So as we evolve to higher quality of consciousness, then we will act more like the body. We will also be a hugely complex system, but the system will not have any hoarding in it. The system will be a system that cares and shares, and doesn't mean that everybody will get everything they want, but it should mean that everybody gets what they need. Everybody can get by, even if they don't get as much as they'd like. Yes, that would be essential. You're not going to have an evolved system where people are still mostly self-focused and it's all about me and how much can I get and how can I keep it. That's very high entropy attitude. So yes, Jessica, as we grow up, we're going to look more and more like that body. We're going to be more cooperative. We're going to be more caring, and it will be about the value that the whole thing gets, not just what some individuals can get. So that ethical change. And all we need to do to change it is grow up.
Well, all we need to do. It's only been a few thousand years. Do you think we're at a point in time now where we at least have an opportunity to make a big leap in that direction if you wake up?
I do think we are at a time when we have an opportunity to make a big leap in that direction. And I think we're more set to do that than we've ever been before. I mean, the human race. We are more likely in the next 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 decades to do that than we were in the last 200,000 years to do that. So we finally get to a point where that's possible. Now, all we have to do is grow up enough individually to make it happen. But yes, now it's at least possible.
Well, let's hope we don't need that antenna in the attic.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. That's very helpful.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, Vanessa, you're next.
Well, I was actually, hi Tom, hi Pamela, hi everybody. So nice to be here.
Yeah, hi Vanessa.
I didn't really have a question. I was testing out the blue hand to see if it worked. I know, what a shock. I don't have a question. Crazy. I'm like trying to think of one. I'm like, what do I need right now? I mean, there's a lot that I could work on in my life. Let's see. I think let's see. Okay, so ego. I'm recognizing my ego. I'm recognizing a lot in work that I'm being very judgmental about people. And I'm often saying, like, looking at leadership and wondering why they're doing things the way they're doing it. And I get frustrated, and I don't listen to people, and I just do things my way, and then that causes friction. So wanting to learn from that. I don't know, maybe any tips around that? I think the biggest thing is that I'm being selfish, and what I keep doing is I'm seeing the world through like only my limited perspective, and I'm judging everybody and comparing everybody to how I would do things. And because people are different than me, they're stupid. I know it's so bad, but I guess if you have any like tips or anything around how to be less egotistical and more other-centered, that would be helpful.
Okay. Well, Vanessa, you are not alone in that discovery. That's kind of typical where most people are. You know, there's always two ways to do things, you know, my way and the wrong way, right? Those are the two ways, two possible ways of doing something. We all tend to feel that way. And yes, it is selfish, it is self-centered. But the fact that you're aware of it is what's unusual. Almost everybody does that, but only a very, very small percentage of the people who do that all the time are aware that they're doing it, that they notice it. So that you're aware of it is a very good sign that you will do less and less of it. Awareness is the key thing. So you've made step one, which is the biggest and hardest step to make. Now all you have to do is when you catch yourself doing that, you have to stop. You know, I don't want to be that way, kind of an intention. And eventually you'll stop being that way. And the thing you have to think about is that you don't want to be a micromanager. See, for micromanagers, they're the ones that say, you know, there's only one right way to do it, and that's my way, right? That's a micromanager. No, don't do that. Do it this way, do it that way, because that's the way I would have done it, you know. And when people are doing things, you have to let them do it their own way. And then look at it and say, well, if this is really bad, if it really fails, you know, the way they're doing it just isn't going to work at all, then you maybe should step in if you're in a position of authority to do so and make the adjustment and have a talk with the person and say, well, I'm afraid that what we have here isn't going to serve our purposes. And here's why, and give them a chance to explain why they think it does serve the purposes and consider what they say. But if it just doesn't, then you can step in and say, well, no, I want it done the other way. And that's okay. You know, so it's not like you should always avoid doing it your way because, you know, you might be being self-centered. No, sometimes your way is going to be the better way that you see the solution and they don't. But you have to give them the opportunity to try to find their own solution and look at it. And if you say, well, that's not the way I would have done it, but that's okay. It's good enough, and let it go, rather than everything has to be the way you would have done it. So you have to accept a lot of things that look suboptimal to you. Well, it could be better, could be more efficient, because of course, however it is you want to do it is the way that's better and most efficient. So you have to let people be suboptimal, do their own thing in their own way, and not be the micromanager that knows everything, because all you do is frustrate people. Because the person that you're working with, they also think that there's their way and the wrong way. And the boss, you know, always wants it done the wrong way. And it gets very frustrating to be, you know, pushed around by your boss to do things in ways that aren't as good.
Yes.
And you know that way, and you feel that way, and it's aggravating, you see.
Because it's not the right way. It's the first time I've had a boss in a really long time working with an organization. And there's so much politics and bureaucracy, and I'm like, why are they doing it this way? And so I think it's a fine line between like speaking up for myself and then, where'd you go? You're over there. Speaking up for myself when I think it's the right thing to do. and then doing it in a diplomatic way. Because I've just been like, well, screw it, I'm going to do it my way anyway. And that hasn't proven to be very helpful.
Yeah. Well,
So,
Vanessa, you work in a social system, and you don't always get what you want when you work in a social system. You have to give and take some. So when people are doing things the wrong way, yes, you can stand up and say, you know, here's how I think it might be better. But if the group in general says, no, we like it the way it is, then let it go. Say,
Yeah.
okay, learn to just let it go. You don't have to fight it to the death, you know, because you know you're right and they're wrong. That's a problem. In a social group, you're always going to have to give some and take some. And you have to let a lot of processes go by that are suboptimal from your viewpoint. But somehow, often, solutions get done and people stumble by, you know, get through anyway, and it all works. And if everybody's happy stumbling through, then it's better than to make everybody, you know, fight. Because as soon as you get intransigent about something, which means you don't want to give in, you want to do it your way, what you do then is you create polarity. Now there's the people who agree with you and the people who disagree with you. And now there's ego builds up on both sides. So now you have these two different poles. And then there's going to be pressure, and each one wants to win, and each one knows the other one is stupid. And if you have much of that going on to where your people who are supposed to be working together are all bifurcating into different poles, you'll never get anything done.
yeah.
Your whole group won't do anything but sit around and argue all day, and they'll be totally dysfunctional. So you just have to allow things to be done not as good as you'd like them to be or as much as you think they would be. But as long as it still sort of might work, then that's all right. You see something that's really wrong, by all means, stand up and say, here's my opinion, and try to be eloquent, try to tell them all the issues. And if they say, nah, we don't want to do that, then just say, okay, and let it go. You don't have to argue or fight or fuss. Just let it be however it is. So part of it is just letting people be who they are,
Yeah.
and not requiring everybody to be you.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. And sorry, just one last thing is then a part of me feels like too is, but you know, if we feel really strongly and passionately about doing the right thing for not just, you know, just for me, but for, you know, a large population of people that will all benefit from it, don't I have a responsibility to stand up and kind of push back for the voices of the people who aren't being heard to the leaders that are in charge? And I get what you're saying is like, okay, well, state your opinion, say what you think is the right way. And if the majority don't agree with you, then you kind of have to let the chips fall where they may. But part of me is like, well, no, I need to get out there. I need to push forward and fight back. Not fight back, that's the wrong word, but I need to be assertive and stand up for what's right.
Well, you should be assertive and stand up for what's right until everybody disagrees with you, and then it's time to stop being assertive. You need to let that organization do whatever that organization's going to do. It's just not made up of little copies of Vanessa. You know, if they did, then everybody would come to the agreement immediately, and they'd do the right thing. But you can't force your own attitudes about how to do things and what's important on other people. They have to get there on their own. And the problem is, and I'm sure you found this out, that when you do try to push, it tends to make people go the other way. When you say, no, that's wrong, now you put somebody into a position of being defensive. Whether they, you know, instead of thinking about it and saying, oh, is there a better way? They say right away, no, I'm not wrong. You see, they're defensive. So they stop thinking about it and start doing ego nonsense, you know, start defending themselves. So if you push, then they'll push back. And pretty soon you got deadlock and nothing happens. So it's not helpful to do that. So what might be more helpful if you have a strong opinion on it is to not let it go in the meeting. Okay, let's say you and 10 people are having a meeting. Let it go in the meeting. The majority wants to move on and they don't agree with you. Perhaps later you could go to whoever the leader is, whoever the, you know, I don't know, whoever the people in charge are, the boss is, and have a little talk with them, but not in a I'm right, you're wrong, or I think it needs to go this way. Just talk about your concerns and say, I'm concerned that if we do this and this, these people over here are going to be left out entirely. That's all. Just give them the concern. Don't tell them how to do it. Bring up the concern and let them think about that concern. You see, that's another way to approach it. Instead of saying, I don't think we should do it that way, we should do it this other way. You can just say, well, I'm concerned about this. And they may say, oh, that'll be taken care of, or that doesn't matter anyway, or, you know, they may say something, and you may just have to swallow it and let it go by, or maybe you can convince people. But in a meeting where there's lots of people, everybody has their ego invested in their status within that group. And when you challenge people in that meeting, you're basically going to get pushback rather than somebody actually open-mindedly thinking about the ideas you bring to it. So you have to present it not as, hey, how about we do it this other way? Or I don't like that way so much, I think there should be another way. That just sets whatever it is you're going to say up for failure. It won't work, even if it's the best idea ever and everybody thinks so. They still can't do it because they have to save face. Saving face is an ego thing. So you're dealing with a lot of different people. They all have their own self-images and status and ego concerns, and you have to get your ideas across without pushing anybody else into defensiveness. So think a little bit more about what you might say without indicating that what's going on is something wrong. Just bring up a point or an issue or something, not a negative about, well, I don't think that's not a good way because that's doomed to failure. Just say, well, what about this thing? You know, we have to be careful not to leave these people out. And then your issue will be addressed. Somebody will address that issue. A smarter way than in trying to tell people what they ought to do.
Yeah.
That'll push back all the time.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Tom Campbell here. I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.